Hello everyone. In today's video I bring you a surprising and transformative story. Let's meet Raven Lockhart, a firefighter who died for a minute and was transported to the other side, where she had an unbelievable experience. What she saw between life and death will change her perception of existence and the true nature of death. Prepare yourself for a journey of revelations that will challenge everything you believe to be true. Before we start, leave your like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any content like this, and activate the bell to receive all notifications. Now, get ready to discover the truth about what happens after death. Fire has always been a dangerous, unpredictable, and relentless adversary. But for me, he was never just that. It was a challenge, a calling. I spent almost 30 years running towards it when everyone else was running away. Being a firefighter has never been just a job. It was my mission, my life. My name is Raven Lockhart, and my story begins in Flagstaff, Arizona, a city surrounded by dense forests and cut by cold mountain winds. I grew up among pine trees and starry skies, learning from an early age that nature can be as beautiful as it is relentless. Ever since I was little, I knew I wanted to do something big, something that mattered. My father was a woodcutter, a man with calloused hands and few words, but with a huge heart. My mother, a teacher, always said that helping others was the only thing that really mattered. What we leave in the world are not the things we own, but the lives we touch, she used to say. I wanted to leave my mark, and that's how I became a firefighter. I remember mine first real occurrence, still as a recruit, a house fire in the middle of the night. The heat was suffocating. The flames roared like a living monster. Adrenaline was running through my veins when I entered the smoke-filled house. I found a little girl cowering in the corner of the room, her eyes wide with fear. "It's okay, little one. I got you," I murmured, wrapping my arms around her. That night, when I placed her in her mother's arms, I knew I would never do anything else again. That was my purpose. Years passed, and each fire, each rescue, each emergency shaped a piece of me. I knew what fear looked like in the eyes of someone who was about to die. He knew what it was like to hold the hand of an injured colleague, promising that everything would be okay. But despite all my courage in the face of death, I never really thought about it. It was a distant shadow, something I saw in others, but that would never belong to me. Until 1994, until the day when I died myself. The winter of 1994 arrived cold and dry. Flagstaff, Arizona. The city, accustomed to the weight of snow and biting mountain winds, faced something different that year. An aggressive flu outbreak. Hospitals were full. Ambulances ran through the streets at all hours. My team and I hadn't had a day off in weeks. Each call seemed more serious than the last. People fainting on the sidewalks, children with dangerous fevers, elderly people who couldn't breathe. I remember that night well. The radio screeched amid the roar of the ambulance engine. 72-year-old woman, high fever, breathing difficulties. My eyes met those of Kenny, my longtime partner. He was one of those guys who always made jokes, but this time his face was serious. "It's going to be another one of those cases, Raven." I nodded, already grabbing my gloves and mask. Experience taught me that in times like these, a routine call could easily become a fight to the death. When we entered the woman's house, the smell of fever and hot sweat was almost suffocating. She was shaking, her lips blue from the effort of breathing. The wheezing in his chest was loud, as if his lungs were drowning. "Let's get her on oxygen now," he said, adjusting the mask over his face. That's when she coughed. The sound was wet and desperate, and it went straight to my face. I felt the heat of her breath on my skin, a mist of hot, tainted air. Even wearing a mask, the impact was direct. My stomach turned with a bad feeling. That night, back at the barracks, I started to feel a slight discomfort in my throat. The next day, the fever came. In less than 48 hours, I was incapacitated. My body burned. Sweat dripped down my skin as I shook violently. I couldn't stand up. The water I drank didn't seem to make any difference. I was dehydrating too quickly. Maggie, my daughter, who at the time was finishing nursing school, insisted on taking me to the hospital. But I resisted. Firefighters' stubbornness, as they said. But then, my heart started racing. The pulse soared to 150 beats per minute. That's when I saw the fear in my daughter's eyes, and I knew I was dying. The emergency room was chaos, or maybe it was just my perception distorted by fever and exhaustion. The white light from the spotlights was too bright, burning my eyes. and the sound of the heart monitors mixed with the ringing in my ears. I was lying on a stretcher, my body hot and dry like a desert, unable to respond correctly to what the doctors were saying. My chest rose and fell too quickly, trying to compensate for the fatigue that consumed every cell of mine. I remember the voice of Dr. Samuel Hawthorne, who was next to me. He spoke to me, but his words seemed to come from underwater. Severe dehydration, dangerous heart rate. Let's start fluids now. A nurse held my arm and inserted an intravenous catheter. The cold liquid running down my vein was the only thing I really felt. But it wasn't enough. Is she in pain? Another voice asked. Not intensely, but we'll administer synthetic morphine and something for the nausea. I tried to raise my hand to protest. I didn't need morphine. I wanted to say that, but my mouth didn't move. The nurse held the syringe and injected the medicines all at once. The effect was immediate. First came a feeling of deep cold, as if my blood had turned to ice. Then my chest seemed to tighten. And then everything stopped. My heart slowed so fast that, for a moment, I felt an absolute silence inside me. My eyes rolled. The hospital ceiling became blurred. I heard someone shout, "Pressure plummeting, 40 to 0. I knew what that meant. 40 to 0 is not compatible with life. Ah, shit, I thought. And then, I left my body. It was so quick and so simple that, at first, I didn't even realize what had happened. Suddenly, I no longer felt pain. I didn't feel heavy, cold, or hot. That's when I looked down, my own body on the stretcher. My arms were still, my lips parted. The color was draining from my face and the monitors started blaring. I saw nurses and doctors running, applying an antidote. I saw my daughter, Maggie, crying outside, trying to get in. But me, I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I was free. Then I felt something pull me up, and I went, away, up, for something much bigger. The first thing I felt was absolute lightness. I no longer had a body, or, if there was, it wasn't a body as I knew it. There was no pain, tiredness, or heaviness. It was as if I were made of air and light at the same time. And then, I saw it. I was no longer in the hospital. There was no ceiling, no walls, no people running desperately to save me. Everything around me was one vast ocean of stars. But these stars were not just bright spots in the sky. They pulsed, vibrated, sang. Each of them seemed alive, as if they had consciousness of their own. I could feel them. They recognized me. And me. I recognized them too. It was like I had been there before, long before any life on Earth. Then, I started moving. Or rather, I was carried away, floating among those vibrant lights. Some were small and sparkling, like fireflies dancing in the night. Others were huge and bright, wreathed in colors I couldn't describe. There was no fear, just absolute ecstasy. I felt like I was sinking into pure bliss, into a love so deep it made my chest expand. It was the kind of love I had never felt before, unconditional, absolute, without limits. I tried to find words to describe that feeling, but words were too small for that. That's when I noticed something even stranger. Earth seemed so far away, and at the same time, so insignificant. The world I knew, my whole life, my pains, my worries, none of that seemed important now. This is real, I thought. And then, something even deeper happened. I remembered, not from a specific moment, not from a particular memory, but everything. Suddenly I knew that human life was just a small fragment of something much larger. I was much more than Raven Lockhart, the Flagstaff firefighter. I existed long before I was born in that city, and I would always exist. And it was then that I felt a presence. Something or somebody was approaching. And for the first time I asked myself, if this was true home, who else would be here with me? The space around me began to shape yourself in a strange way. The cosmic vastness, once infinite, now seemed to take shape. The brightness of the stars softened, as if I were landing in a more solid place, more defined. Then I felt something moving around me, and then I saw them. 3 small hooded figures, wearing dark cloaks. Their faces were invisible beneath their hoods, but their eyes glowed silvery, like small headlights in the dark. They were small, no taller than an 8-year-old, and they moved with agility, as if the space around them was bending to their will. But what surprised me most was the sound that echoed around the room. They were laughing. Not a sinister laugh, not a mocking laugh, but a pure, childish, joyful laugh. She came back, but forgot about us, said one of them, pointing at me as if he had discovered something incredibly funny. The other two laughed even harder, nudging each other, as if sharing an inside joke I didn't understand. I took a step, or at least I thought to take a step. There was no ground there, and yet I moved. Gravity seemed non-existent or irrelevant. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice coming out clear but without real sound, like an amplified thought. The three little beings stopped laughing for a moment. One of them tilted his head curiously, as if my question was unexpected. "The same thing as you, but without forgetting." "Forget what?" "Who you really are." There was silence for a moment. Their words made something inside me twist. They spoke to absolute certainty, as if that were obvious, as if I were there not for the first time, but returning. I tried to remember. Before Earth, before Raven Lockhart, before Flagstaff, but my human mind couldn't hold on to that truth long enough. It was like trying to hold water in my hands. The harder I tried, the more it escaped. The three beings laughed again, running around me, playing with each other like fox cubs. "She's trying," exclaimed one. "She never remembers the first time," said another. "But he can help her." And then, suddenly they stopped. His eyes shined even brighter, and, in perfect sync, they turned behind me. That's when I saw him. One immense and resplendent presence, which radiated a light so intense that my very being seemed vibrate and expand just for being there. It was like look to the very source of all existing love, and at that moment, I knew nothing else mattered, because he was there. The glow around me intensified until everything was light. It wasn't just any light. It wasn't the sun. It wasn't fire. It wasn't something I could compare to what I knew on Earth. It was alive. I don't just via that light. I felt it. It had texture, weight, heat, but it didn't burn. Its brilliance was not blinding. It enveloped, sustained, filled, and in the center of that light was him, the luminous being. It was tall, majestic, but not in a way that imposes fear. On the contrary, your presence, it brought a love so absolute and so overwhelming that my very being seemed to expand just by being there. If I still had a physical body, I would have fallen to my knees at that moment, but I didn't have it. I was not flesh. I was not bones. I was consciousness, pure and complete, and he knew it. He knew everything about me. You knew who I was, who I would always be, and still loved me unconditionally. It was at that moment that I felt something inside me tear and rebuild at the same time. My throat tightened, my chest expanded, and if I had had tears, I would have cried, but I couldn't speak. I didn't need to, because he already you knew. And then, without moving his lips, without making a sound, he spoke. "You need to go back." The words didn't come as a sound. They came like instant knowledge, engraved straight into my soul. I stared at him, perplexed. To go back? My mind, or whatever it was now, fought against this idea. "I don't want to go back. Your mission is not over yet." He said this with so much certainty, so much peace that my entire being shook, but I didn't want to accept it. "My family will be fine without me. I've already done my part. I spent years saving lives. Can't that be enough?" He smiled, not disapproval, not out of impatience, but with the tenderness of someone who understands something that I didn't yet understand. And then, something started to happen. The environment around me began to dissolve. The colors of the stars faded. The solid space where I was melted away like mist in the sun. He didn't answer me with words, but I felt it. I knew. I had no choice. And before I could say anything else, I started to fall, falling. But I wasn't returning to my body. I was going somewhere else. And for the first time since I died, I felt scared. The feeling of falling was overwhelming. I was no longer floating among stars. I was no longer enveloped in that welcoming light. I was being pulled down. It was as if an invisible force was holding me by the shoulders and dragging me along a path, dark and endless tunnel. The speed was absurd, but I didn't feel wind. I didn't feel resistance. The only thing I felt was fear. I tried to fight. I tried to hold on to something, but there was nothing there. Everything around me was shadows and emptiness. Then, suddenly, I stopped, and I realized where I was. It was a place no light. It wasn't like the starry space I had been in before. It wasn't welcoming. It wasn't vibrant. It wasn't eternal. Dense, heavy, oppressive. The silence there was different. It was a silence that oppressed. I wanted to move, but for some reason, I couldn't. And that's when I felt it. Something was there with me. I didn't see anything, but I knew something was watching me. I don't know if it was a presence, a shadow, a consciousness, but it was not like the luminous being. There was no love there. It was at that moment that I wanted to go back. I wanted to return to the light, to the love, to the warmth. I don't want to stay here. My own voice sounded weak, distant, and then an answer came, but not of words. It was like a whisper inside my mind, a truth etched directly into my soul. This place is always close. My eyes, or whatever I had in that state, they widened. What did this mean? I felt a vibration building around me, as if the place was closing in on me. An invisible pressure began to squeeze my being, and then a burst of force pulled me up. I got sucked back in. The dark place had disappeared, and I felt my body again. The pain, the weight, the cold, the heat, the sound of the monitors, the smell of the hospital. And then, the first thing I did when I opened my eyes was gasp. I was back, and the first thing I heard was my daughter's crying. Mother, she held my hand. His eyes were red from crying. That's when I realized what had happened. I really died. And I came back. But why? What did I still need to do here? For a moment, I didn't know where I was. There were noises around me. Beep, 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 the insistent sound of the monitors. Muffled voices. A smell of alcohol and disinfectant filled the air. But none of that mattered, because my mind was still there, in that place. The dark place. The weight of that darkness still pressed against my chest, as if a part of me hadn't been able to escape. Like I was still connected to him, even though I was back on Earth. What was that? I didn't know. But one thing was certain. It was real. More real than any nightmare I'd ever had. And now, that thought terrified me. This place is always close. That phrase, whispered inside my mind, still echoed, always close. The darkness I saw, it was not something distant, isolated, unattainable. She was here, close. But what did that mean? My thoughts were interrupted by a gentle touch on my hand. Mother? I opened my eyes. My daughter, Maggie, was by my side. His eyes were red from crying, but his face lit up when he saw me awake. You're back. There was relief in his voice, but also something else. Something broken, as if she was carrying a weight that she didn't want to share with me. I tried to smile, but I couldn't. My lips barely moved. I felt exhausted. That's when a third voice spoke. Welcome back, Raven. I turned around with difficulty. The doctor, Samuel Hawthorne. He was at the foot of the bed, watching the monitors, a puzzled look on his face. He was a pragmatic man. I had never seen him hesitate or doubt. But now he looked at me as if he was seeing a mystery he couldn't solve. What happened? I asked, my voice hoarse. The doctor crossed his arms, taking a deep breath before answering. His blood pressure dropped to critical levels. His breathing practically stopped. He paused, then frowned, as if he didn't quite know how to continue. Technically, you should be dead. Silence. I just stared at him. Why, I knew that. You had died. My own body. I got out of it. I went to another place. To two other places. The first, where the light was pure and the love absolute. And the second, the dark place. My fingers tightened on the sheet without me realizing it. A shiver ran down my spine. Dr. Hawthorne continued. We gave him an antidote to the opiate overdose. And somehow, his heart came back. He studied me for a moment. You were lucky. Slowly, I looked away. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to say that it wasn't luck. I wanted to say that I saw things that no one would understand, but I couldn't. Why, something inside me said that it wasn't meant to be talked about. Not yet. Whatever had happened to me. Whatever that was, dark place. You needed to understand. Before telling the world, I still couldn't move properly. My body felt like dead weight, a prison of flesh that didn't match what I had just experienced. My mind was torn between two worlds. The hospital was real. I felt my daughter's touch, the strong smell of disinfectant. I heard the monitors beeping, but what I had seen beyond was also real. And now, that thought tormented me, because did I still feel the echo of that dark place inside me? I blinked slowly, trying to organize my thoughts. Maggie still held my hand. as if she were afraid I would disappear if she let go. "What happened?" I asked, my voice coming out weaker than I would have liked. Maggie looked at Dr. Hawthorne, who remained silent for a moment before responding. "You had a sudden drop in blood pressure after taking medication. Technically, his heart didn't stop, but..." He hesitated. "There was a time when we thought we wouldn't be able to bring her back." There was a weight to those words, as if, for an instant, even science had doubted itself. I stared at him. How long was I gone? He checked my monitors before responding. Just over a minute. But considering his condition, it should have been irreversible. 1 minute. The experience I had, it seemed like an eternity. The vastness of the universe, the vibrant stars, the luminous being, all of this happened in a time that made no sense. It was as if I had fallen out of the normal timeline. And now I was here, back, but something was different. Maggie watched me carefully, her eyes reflecting more than relief. She noticed. She knew that something had happened to me beyond medicine, but I couldn't talk about it. Not yet. What would I say? I died and traveled through the cosmos. I met 3 playful beings and a being of light that radiated absolute love. But before returning, I passed through a place of shadows that terrified me. It sounded like madness. Dr. Hawthorne closed my file, adjusting his glasses on his face. "We will keep her under observation, but the tests indicate that her recovery is surprisingly good. Your vital signs are returning to normal faster than we expected." He gave me a look that said what he was saying out loud. Something about my recovery didn't make sense to him, and I knew exactly why. Maggie shook my hand. His face was still marked by the fear he felt when he saw me in that state. "I thought you weren't coming back." Those words struck something inside me, because deep down, I also thought I wouldn't come back, and if I were honest with myself, part of me didn't want to go back. I swallowed hard, but I came back. That was all I could say. She nodded, blinking rapidly away the tears. Dr. Hawthorne was preparing to leave when he stopped at the door. He hesitated, then looked over his shoulder. "Do you remember anything? What happened while you were unconscious?" The air seemed to become denser. My heart beat faster. It was the question I knew was coming. But what could I say? I felt the weight of that dark place still attached to me, but I also felt the warmth of that light, the absolute love I had experienced. I remembered the voice of the luminous being. "Your mission is not over yet." My gaze met the doctor's, and for the first time in my entire life, I lied deliberately. "No, I don't remember anything." Hawthorne studied me for a moment, but didn't question. He just nodded and left the room. Maggie sighed beside me, relieved. But I wasn't relieved. Why, I remembered everything. And now, I needed to understand what it meant to be back. The following days were a mixture of silence and confusion. I was still in the hospital, but my mind was far from there. I was back, but I wasn't the same anymore. The cold light of the room, the smell of disinfectant, the sounds of the heart monitors. Everything seemed so unreal compared to what I experienced. I missed a place that shouldn't be possible. The luminous being, the living stars, the 3 little laughing beings, and the other place, the darkness that I saw, that I felt around me. That phrase still echoed in my mind. This place is always close. What did that mean? That there was a space between life and death that some souls were trapped in. That there was something beyond the light, something that no one talked about. The weight of this thought stayed with me for weeks. The following week, I was discharged. Maggie helped me into comfortable clothes, and Dr. Hawthorne signed the papers with that same look of doubt on his face. "If you feel anything strange, come back immediately." He wasn't just talking about the physical. I knew, but I didn't respond. I just thanked him and left. The cold Flagstaff air hit my face as soon as I stepped out of the hospital. The world felt different, sharper, deeper. Maggie helped me into the car. During the ride home, we were silent. I knew she wanted to ask. I knew that at some point someone would ask. But what would I say? My daughter parked in the garage and turned off the engine. He spent a moment looking ahead, with his hands on the steering wheel, before finally saying, "I know something happened to you." My chest tightened. She slowly turned her head to look at me. "I saw your face when you woke up, Mom. It wasn't just a scare. It wasn't just the illness." I swallowed hard. "Maggie, you died, didn't you?" Those words remained between us, carried with an invisible weight. I could deny it. I could lie again like I did to Dr. Hawthorne, but she was my daughter, and I didn't want to carry that alone anymore. So I closed my eyes for a second and replied, "Yes." Silence. Maggie took a deep breath. "What did you see?" I looked out of the car, at the mountains in the distance, at the clear sky. The words were in my throat, caught between fear and the need to tell them. But in the end, he just said, "I saw everything." She watched me, waiting for more, but I didn't insist. I knew she would understand in her own time. Living with the truth. The months passed. I went back to my routine, but nothing looked the same. The fear of death simply had disappeared. I knew that when my real time came, there would be no end, just the return. And at the same time, I became more careful with the people around me, because now I knew that the love we give to others is the only thing we take away from here. But something still disturbed me. The dark place. If I saw that place, then it was real. What happened to whoever couldn't find the light? The answer to that question still haunted me. But I knew one thing. I wouldn't go back to that place. Not again. When it was my real time, I would go home, to the stars, into the light, for him. And until then, I needed to find my mission, because now I knew. I came back for a reason, and I wouldn't rest until I found out what it was. If you like this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.